In California, Mr. and Mrs. Livingston have a baby who was born without an immune system, meaning even the slightest germ could kill him. To keep him safe, everything he touches must be decontaminated, and he must live in isolation. Their son, Jimmy, is placed inside a plastic bubble where he'll remain for the rest of his life. This situation makes Mrs. Livingston overly protective, and she doesn't bring Jimmy home until he turns 4. When other kids try to meet him, she scares them away, claiming the world outside is dirty and that they'll never need to leave their house again. The Livingstons prepare their home for Jimmy, creating a large bubble for him to walk around in freely. There's a decontamination hatch for delivering food and toys and retractable arms so his parents can still hug him. Mrs. Livingston takes care of him, reading to him every night but keeping him very sheltered. Jimmy is only allowed to read and watch sanitized content approved by his religious mother. She also homeschools him with extreme nationalist views. When neighborhood kids mock him, Mrs. Livingston chases them off with cold water. Jimmy only eats his mom's homemade bland food as she doesn't approve of fat or sugar. She even complains when Mr. Livingston buys Jimmy a bicycle, fearing it could kill him. At 16, instead of a car, Jimmy receives an electric guitar. One day, Jimmy notices new neighbors moving in, including a girl named Chloe. He instantly falls for her, but Mrs. Livingston disapproves, indirectly insulting Chloe by reading stories about boys who die for interacting with inappropriate neighbors. Jimmy starts cleaning the window daily just to see Chloe, and this coincides with him hitting puberty. The first time he wakes up with an erection, he panics and tries to hit it with a bat. His mother calms him by teaching him to recite the Pledge of Allegiance until the problem goes away. Chloe, hearing rumors about Jimmy, scolds her friends for mocking him and decides to introduce herself. Mr. Livingston opens the door and Chloe follows the tube system to Jimmy's bubble. Jimmy gets nervous and accidentally calls her a derogatory term his mother uses, not understanding its meaning. Chloe brushes it off and they bond over Jimmy's guitar. She promises to return and Jimmy teaches her to play using the gloved hands on his bubble. He recites the pledge every time he gets too excited. Chloe begins visiting regularly, and though Mrs. Livingston disapproves, she can't stop them. For Jimmy's birthday, Chloe gives him a guinea pig inside its own bubble. And on Halloween, she brings him candy and introduces him to the holiday. One night, Chloe sneaks into Jimmy's room while drunk, hoping for a birthday kiss, but she passes out in the decontamination chamber. On her prom night, she shows Jimmy her dress, and they take pictures together. However, Jimmy is heartbroken when he sees her leave with her boyfriend, Mark, who damages the bubble with his cigarette. Jimmy later catches Chloe and Mark kissing through the window, which shatters him. Mrs. Livingston reminds him that women will always leave. Not long after, Chloe visits Jimmy with news. Mark has proposed, and they're getting married at Niagara Falls. She tries to give Jimmy one last gift, but he's hurt and refuses to open it, returning the guinea pig and telling her to leave. Chloe departs in tears, prompting Jimmy to finally open her gift. To his surprise, Jimmy finds a handmade snow globe with the words, "I love you" inside. Overjoyed, Jimmy decides to finally take control of his life. He creates a smaller version of his bubble that would allow him to leave home and stop the wedding. While his parents are asleep, Jimmy tries to sneak out but trips and tumbles down the stairs. The noise wakes Mr. Livingston, but instead of stopping him, he silently encourages Jimmy from bed. Once outside, Jimmy is thrilled by everything he sees: dog poop, the sunlight, and the fact that he can run. He eventually reaches the bus station but realizes he doesn't have enough money for a ticket. While figuring out a plan, he crosses the street and gets hit by a bus. Fortunately, his bubble protects him. The bus passengers are concerned and, upon hearing about his mission, agree to help him by taking him to Niagara Falls. Meanwhile, at home, Mrs. Livingston discovers Jimmy is missing and panics. She calls the police, but they don't take her seriously, so she convinces her husband to write a fake kidnapping note. However, he signs it the Jews, so it's not taken seriously either. Determined, the couple decides to search for Jimmy themselves and stop at the bus station, where the clerk tells them about Jimmy's plan to go to Niagara Falls. Back on the bus, Jimmy starts noticing odd details about the passengers: their uniforms, the lyrics of their songs, their shared names, and the content of their strange book. Realizing they are part of a cult, Jimmy makes the mistake of calling them out, which angers the group. They promptly kick him off the bus, leaving him stranded in the middle of the desert. Now alone, Jimmy encounters random animals as he tries to find his way. Eventually, he crosses paths with a biker named Slim, who menacingly threatens him with a knife. Jimmy explains that he can help Slim fix his bike. Grateful for the assistance, Slim agrees to give Jimmy a ride once he hears about his mission. Slim shares that he once loved a woman named Wildlife who left him for another man, and to this day, Slim is determined to find that man and kill him. Meanwhile, the cult finally reunites with their leader, who reveals a prophecy carved on a rock. It foretells that the Chosen One will arrive with the Holy Word inside a living globe. The cult members believe this refers to Jimmy, so they set off to track him down. That night, Jimmy and Slyn reach Las Vegas, where Jimmy is mesmerized by the city's attractions. He attends his first concert and is tossed around by the crowd like a ball. Slyn introduces him to gambling, explaining what it's like to be with a woman. When Jimmy notices a scooter as a prize, he gambles until he wins it, and pressed for time with only 2 days left, decides to leave without Slyn. Soon after, both the Livingstons and the cult arrive in Las Vegas as well. Upon seeing the cult, Slyn realizes they're the ones who abandoned Jimmy in the desert and threatens to kill him. In response, the cult's bus runs over Slyn's bike. A few hours later, Jimmy is spotted by his parents riding the scooter. Mrs. Livingston forces her husband to block Jimmy's path with her car, but they accidentally hit the scooter. Jimmy is launched into the air, bouncing around in his bubble until he finally lands inside a moving train. Panicking, Jimmy discovers the train is filled with members of a freak show, owned by a cruel man known as Dr. Freak, who treats them like slaves. The train suddenly stops and Jimmy bounces out only to find Dr. Freak waiting for him. Jimmy laughs at Dr. Freak's small stature, angering him enough to smash a car's windows as a warning. However, when Dr. Freak learns Jimmy is the bubble boy, he sees him as a potential new attraction for his show. Jimmy refuses, which prompts Dr. Freak to jump on the bubble and mock him, claiming no woman could ever love a weirdo like him. Offended, Jimmy pushes him off, and the force of the bubble causes Dr. Freak to fly into the air, ultimately crashing into a large truck. Jimmy prepares to continue his journey, and the other freaks, seeing his defiance, attempt to follow him. He reassures them that they are now free to do whatever they want, but Jimmy must complete his mission on his own. Jimmy takes a handcar to continue along the train tracks, but it's too slow. He stops at a nearby restaurant to seek help, where he encounters a sheriff and a group of rednecks mocking a man named Push Pop. Jimmy steps in to defend him, but the men turn their insults on Jimmy. When they learn he has no immunity, they mistakenly believe he has a contagious disease and panic, running out of the restaurant. In their haste, they slam the door, causing a lamp to fall and start a fire. Jimmy panics as the flames spread, but thankfully, Push Pop appears at the back door and rescues him in his ice cream and curry truck. The wild driving almost throws Jimmy out, but they manage to escape just before the restaurant explodes. Meanwhile, the Livingstons arrive at the train and question Dr. Freak about Jimmy's whereabouts. Mrs. Livingston treats Freak like a child, offering candy in exchange for information. Afterward, Mrs. Livingston calls Clove, demanding she stay away from her son and rudely insulting her. During the distraction, the other freaks steal the Livingston's car. Determined to get his group back, Dr. Freak steals a truck and leaves with the couple. Back with Jimmy, he shares his plan to stop the wedding with Push Pop, who agrees to drive him to Niagara Falls. Jimmy falls asleep on the trip and has a strange dream where Chloe is attacked by dinosaurs. He tries to save her but is defeated, and Mark ends up rescuing her instead. Jimmy wakes up screaming, startling Push Pop and causing him to accidentally hit a cow in the road. Deeply upset because cows are sacred in his religion, Push Pop tells Jimmy to leave after Jimmy ignorantly repeats his mom's belief that all other religions are lies. Push Pop stays behind to perform a ritual for the cow. As Jimmy walks away enjoying ice cream for the first time, a truck drives by and crushes the cow even further. Shortly after, Slim shows up with a gang of bikers and they question Push Pop about the cult. While waiting, they indulge in his ice cream and watch in astonishment as the cult bus arrives and runs over their bikes. Push Pop then agrees to give the gang a ride. Meanwhile, Chloe is trying on her wedding dress, but she feels uncertain because she can't stop thinking about Jimmy. That evening, Jimmy reaches a town and asks a man named Pappy for a ride. Pappy demands $500, which Jimmy obviously doesn't have, but Jimmy sees a sign advertising a cash prize and enters the building. To his surprise, it's a naughty club, and Jimmy agrees to wrestle two beautiful women in the mud. Thanks to his bubble, the women keep slipping off him, unable to hurt him, and Jimmy easily wins the match while reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. With the prize money in hand, Jimmy goes to find Pappy, only to stumble upon the cult bus instead. The cultists quickly kidnap him, which is witnessed by the freaks who have just arrived. The cult takes Jimmy to their ritual site, preparing to free him from his bubble. This story takes us on a wild, heartwarming journey filled with bizarre and quirky adventures. Jimmy, sheltered for most of his life in a bubble, sets out to stop his true love, Chloe, from marrying someone else. Along the way, he encounters a crazy mix of characters like bikers, cultists, freaks, and even a bizarre truck driver named Push Pop. After an intense showdown at the cult's ritual site, Jimmy manages to escape, only to find himself constantly pursued by everyone he's met. A mad chase through towns, deserts, and ultimately the skies leads to Jimmy bursting into Chloe's wedding at Niagara Falls. In a heart-stopping moment, he dramatically declares his love for her, even collapsing at the altar from his supposed illness. But in a surprise twist, it's revealed that Jimmy was never sick. His overprotective mother had lied to him all these years. With the truth out, Jimmy wakes up and finally embraces life with newfound freedom. The adventure wraps up with Jimmy and Chloe tying the knot in front of all the colorful characters he's met on his journey, from Push Pop to Slim and even the Freaks. In a lighthearted and bizarre final scene, Humi's parents are now in a polyamorous relationship with Slim, and the cultists have converted to Push Pop's beliefs. This wacky, feel-good ending celebrates the power of love, friendship, and living life to the fullest. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.